over the past few months, we have covered a series of topics, including demystifying philanthropy in gender justice and digital rights. We had a session on what the people who make change happen. So we had change makers in the room telling us their stories of the work that they do at the intersection of gender justice and technology. And we also looked at funding in the space. And the last session we had was more on how we can collaborate better in the space. And these various episodes have achieved a lot of objectives, such as identifying ways in which philanthropy can be more strategic in this space. We have distilled lessons from individuals and organizations in the areas they are working, and we've also looked at the best funding practices in this space. So today, we're going to be tying it all together because we have had a very enriching year in this, in having these conversations with you all. Some of you probably started with us, and some of you joined midway, and some of you might be joining for the first time today, but we welcome you all the same. And if you're joining us for the first time, you have the opportunity to still catch some of the key issues or salient issues that came out during the course of the year, because we're going to be discussing in full what we have, or we're going to be touching on the various aspects of the conversations that we've had this year. And there is no one better to have that conversation with. I have with me Adora Ikenze, who I have known for, I don't know, Adora, I think I've known you for about 15 years or longer, I'm not sure, but it's been a while. And Adora is the director for public policy in Anglophone Africa with Meta. She's been gracious enough to join us at this time, this hour. She is, some of you are waking up in the States, and some people are saying good night. And Adora is currently in Singapore. So thank you so much for joining us today, Adora, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Mosu. There's no way I could refuse an invitation from the Africa Philanthropy Forum. You have my utmost respect, and it is an honor to be invited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Adora. Before Adora starts, I'll just take a moment to share briefly her bio. I've shared that she's currently the Director of Public Policy for Anglophone Africa at Meta. She works across Africa, Europe, and the US, as she has worked, across Africa, Europe, and the US as a lawyer, development expert, political advisor, and a nonprofit funder. Prior to Meta, she held senior positions with the Global Fund for Women in San Francisco, the Commonwealth Secretariat in London, and the Open Society Initiative for West Africa in Nigeria. As the founder and principal of Africa Philanthropy Advisory Services, Adora provides guidance and advisory services for national and international agencies, such as the Ministry of Petroleum Resources in Nigeria, Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, NIMASA, UNIFEM, and the World Bank. And it goes on and on. She has a track record in this space, and she's been working at the intersection of technology, gender, funding, and various aspects of philanthropy and the social sector for several years. So again, welcome, Adora. So I'll start with a question that is still similar to the first question that we had at the beginning of the year, which and that session was on demystifying philanthropy. And in that session, we attempted to deconstruct what gender justice is and what digital rights are. We also sought to showcase global examples of what has worked in this space and the different forms through which stakeholders in the philanthropy space can engage. And from that conversation, it was clear that women are disproportionately disadvantaged regarding access to opportunities in this space. So how would you characterize the current state of gender justice in the context of digital technology in Africa? And what landmark progress has been achieved in this space this year that illustrates improvement?
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm actually going to start, not necessarily on a particularly positive note. I will say, let me start by answering the second
Take it.
question first. Yeah. And I don't honestly think that there's been any landmark achievement. I think that we can reasonably be proud that the conversation around gender justice and gender equity in the tech space and around digital rights has been advanced. I was quite pleased to see, the theme this year of International Women's Day was digital, which really focused on women's access and opportunities within the digital space. But I think that when you recognize that gender justice within the digital space is simply a reflection of gender justice in all other spaces, the same level of lack of access and inequities, lack of opportunity exists. I don't know that there has necessarily been any landmark improvement. I think that we should be pleased that the conversation about gender justice has also moved into the digital space, but that's about it. The issues, the opportunities, the challenges remain the same. And so that is the premise that's going to be my response. Which is not to say that there's no cause for optimism or there are no opportunities, but we definitely cannot pat ourselves on the back at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Adora, for being frank. And that's what we want to hear. We want to know exactly what is happening so that the philanthropists in our network can better direct their resources. And it's important that you say that this is not just about digital technology, or it's a reflection of what is happening in the gender space in all sectors. So one of the sessions focused on funding. I think that might have been the third session or so that we had. And again, clearly, funding is limited. Funding is limited everywhere in this space. I was just chatting with you earlier. It's clear to us in this space that there's a long way to go. There are changes happening. We have a lot more locals funding or doing work in this space. I always say that when I started out in this space several years ago, we wrote grant applications only to Ford Foundation and maybe United Way. But along the way, we started writing grant applications to local indigenous philanthropic organizations and foundations. So there is some progress, but we also know that a lot of the foundations that are being established they are operating foundations, so they are not necessarily grant making. So funding remains an issue in this space. But what would like to know from your experience as a donor in the donor space, and given what you do now, what issues do you think attract the most attention and the most funding, and why?
That is an age-long question. It's not just so. I've been in the funding space for over 30 years, and I've seen various waves of issues and hot topics come and go. But to distill it, we're looking specifically at the African continent and the segment that APF targets. There are two things that stand out. First, you're right. The majority of your members are operating foundations. They are indigenous private foundations that have been established with an idea to impact on a particular sector or particular issue. The founders typically have an idea of what they are going to be supporting. It could stem from their careers, it could stem from their personal passions or their backgrounds, or, but they come relatively well formed. So when you're bringing in issues like gender justice in the digital space, which was not part of the original ideation of funding of the funding trajectory, it's difficult to slot in. The second thing is that on the continent, we don't have the luxury that other climates have, where there are established public foundations that have a breadth and a flexibility to their funding. Now, that's a good and a bad thing. It's a bad thing in the sense that that's the reason why we have seen insufficient consistency in grant support to projects, because the foundation, there's something, if it's female genital mutilation, or if it's guinea worm, or if it's that's what the hot climate change, that's the hot public topic. So a public foundation, in order to continue to resonate with its individual donors and to be able to continue to collect the support, has to go with public sentiment. Now, that doesn't necessarily bode well for stability for grantees. And Africa has historically suffered from that. So not having, but on the flip side, you do have, as a public foundation, you have the flexibility to move and to be able to support, to ideate, to change your grant focus areas as well. So it's a double, it's a sword with two sides. On one side, there is a very legitimate risk of lack of stability, and on the other side, there is the flexibility, coupled with the fact that locally we are yet to have that balance of funding that can provide relative stability and flexibility. So our indigenous funding environment is very much dominated by individual private foundations that have an idea of what they want to do. And like you said, they're operating foundations. So it's been endowed, and it will be looking at working on health. It will be looking at working on education. Now, when you're looking at for me, the opportunity comes when you look at the centrality of gender issues to whatever topic you're trying to fund, and that's where I see opportunity. But in response to your question, what are the trends? What have we seen? It's not been good. It's not been stable. There have been we have managed to achieve a lot, but we can still achieve a lot more with stability and with flexibility.
Thank you very much, Adora. I have a follow-up question, which is on the flexibility. There's the flexibility side to this. What can we do? And by we, I mean the nonprofits in this space. What can they do to get to get on the radar of African philanthropists, to get them to see, or to help change their mindset in a way that the flexibility will suit the nonprofits that are working in this space? I get what you mean when you say that you're looking at this in the totality of, as long as we're moving forward in the gender space and gender issues, that's a good thing. But then we're also for this particular conversation, we're also looking at the intersection of gender justice and digital technology. But even looking at it as a whole, what is it that will bring out that flexibility or enable the flexibility in philanthropists or foundations, if there is any that come to mind?
So I think that when I look at an organization like the Africa Philanthropy Forum, I see you having two roles. I see you having a convening role, and I see you having also a facilitating role. You are probably the only organization on the continent that, first of all, enjoys such a high level of trust amongst individual funders, that enjoys the reputation of authenticity and rigor in your understanding of the philanthropic space. So when you ask the question, okay, what could grantees do to be able to catch the eye of funders? Knowing what you know about the limitations in the space, knowing who you know in the space, I think you have a responsibility, first of all, to take on an additional convening role and to bring people together and say, listen, yes, we know you're interested in X, Y, and Z, right? But if we are looking at philanthropy being the catalyst for social change, for being the catalyst for systemic developmental progress, we also have to look at funding these critical areas. Now, we're not asking you to deviate from your original objectives, but we are offering you an opportunity to also intervene in these critical spaces. So it could be something like, you set up, you could be the host for a dedicated fund where grantees can come to you. And so your members could say, okay, fine, I'm still going to hand with my 90% of I have $100 that I want to invest, and I want to do health. Okay, I will give to the dedicated fund that is hosted and managed by APF $10. And APF will be the repository. The APF will manage that program. We all agree that there is need for us to support this critical area, because regardless of what I'm doing in health, if women don't have access to simple things like being able to reach out to their local primary healthcare facility and get digital updates on prenatal care, or be able to access their medical records, or being able to whatever it is, ultimately, whatever support I am giving will be flawed. So I can continue with my mainstream support, be it upskilling, providing support for capacity building for primary care healthcare workers, but I'm putting 10% to make sure that the beneficiaries of what I am primarily supporting actually have the access, the opportunity to be able to get that resource. I think that we have to think strategically. I think that one of the wonderful things I see is that the philanthropic space in Africa is becoming so much more mature. So much more mature. Before it was, we have, I have a family foundation. Once a year, we do T-shirts and we go out and we, face caps, and we give money in the name of my, my grandmother, or I have a school in my village, and that's it. We have gone beyond all that. I think also that one of the things that I am particularly, I'm conscious of is that a lot of the members and the founders are also people who have the opportunity to step back and take a much wider view of the developmental issues and have the access sometimes to move the needle in ways that are not publicly seen as well. You might have so you look at take any of the big family foundations abroad, Ford, Rockefeller, Carnegie, yes, they had their institutional foundations. Hewlett, but I guarantee you that there were times when their founders picked up the phone and called, you see it with the Soros Foundation, called and said, okay, this is an issue that goes beyond money. We can see the policy ramifications. We can see the economic ramifications. We can see the social ramifications. And what we're saying is, we have a foundation, we have an opportunity to be able to input into the wider conversation. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Absolutely, you are, and it's a great segue to my next question around collaboration. When you talked about picking up the phone and understanding that sometimes these issues are bigger than one person, bigger than one foundation. But before we go there, I got the message loud and clear. This is a role that APF can and APF actually plays. But there's a lot more that we can do in this space, given the quality of members of our community and their influence as well. So I would say the most interesting conversation we had this year was the last one, and it was on leveraging the currency of collaboration. And during that session, there was a lot around how much more we can do, how much we can be more transformative when we collaborate, because we have the tendency to work in silos. I mean, even though we're maturing, we're becoming more strategic in the space, there's still a lot that is being done on an individual basis. And there's a need for us to begin to come together, leave our logos behind, and recognize that there's a need for systemic change in our space. And to do that, we all have to work together, regardless of our individual preferences or ideas about how things should be done. Of course, there's a lot to iron out when you are collaborating. And I think that's one of the things I would expect you to shed light on. But just basically to look at the larger goal of moving the development needle in Africa, and setting some of the minor issues or what we consider that things that we see as hindrances, but we don't necessarily need to focus on at this point so that we can get to the larger goal. So I would like to hear what your experience has been in this regard when it comes to collaboration. What best practices have you seen? What exists in this space now? What can we learn from? And not necessarily from Africa alone, from all that you have done across the world. What would you say are the key takeaways for you when it comes to collaboration, and how can we do better on the continent?
I think the most important things, first of all, is a shared understanding of the goals. I might be working in health, you might be working in sanitation, like somebody else, Henrietta might be working in education, but we have an underlining common objective, which is advancing gender justice. Yeah. I think that it is important for people to be as open as possible. Yeah, I was listening to the conversation with Alberto and Latanya, and I remember Alberto's example of previously working in IGRC and now working at Ford, and being able to leverage his knowledge of the research community in IGRC to support the advocacy work that he's doing. One of the things that I am constantly impressed about is the amount of information that people have. in Africa. There is no sector, there is no issue that we do not have world-class research and information and strategies that have been documented about. The question is, first of all, are we willing to ask, to be open enough to share that information? And are we willing to partner on to achieve a particular goal? It's difficult when you're fighting for the same small pot of resources. Collaboration is not something that is, regardless of philanthropy being, and I dislike that word intensely, having the impression of charity. It's not. It is not a charitable space. It is a rigorous application of private funds for public good. And that application comes with, just as many stringent conditions and expectations as, any other endeavor that is answerable to a principle. So when you have your information, it's difficult when you know that you're all rushing for the same pot of money. But at the end of the day, I think that collaboration is essential. Openness, and understanding that you cannot, ultimately, you won't be able to get the maximum impact by yourself, no matter how brilliant your plan is or your research is, or so one of the things that I am also particularly interested in is looking at, it's not enough to support grantees in the execution of their projects. It is, when we're looking at building the philanthropic sector on the continent, is looking at how foundations themselves interrogate their own ways of engaging. We're at a fortunate space that, we're relatively young, and yet with our youth, we pack a punch. There's money, there's intellect, there's resources. And we are at a perfect juncture to be able to say to ourselves, okay, how do we want to do this? And do it so that we do it at scale across the continent, and the issues that we are working on, we maximize our resources from the beginning. When you look at the history of other foundations and philanthropy globally, they used to work in silos. Yeah, Rockefeller till today is still known for education, but they are also extremely collaborative. Ford has always been the master of collaboration. Hewlett, Global Fund for Women, all of them, they understand the power of those networks. They understand the power, and in expanding your network, you have the opportunity to bring in funding and support that you never really thought about. I remember when the Global Fund for Women started having the circles around Indigenous women. And at that time, nobody was looking at the rights of Indigenous women. I remember they funded the very first schools for girls in Afghanistan. And it came from the idea that our money is every woman's money. It doesn't matter where you are. If you have something that you want to do and we have the ability to support you, bring your resources, we will bring our money. So it's a mindset. It's a mindset of understanding that yes, we may be endowed by an individual, we may be set up to do a certain thing, but the ultimate goal is that the impact that we are trying to achieve, the change that we are trying to trigger, or that we are trying to establish should be maximized. And in order to be able to maximize that, we have to be willing to collaborate. We have to be willing to leverage and allow ourselves to be leveraged as well. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Should allow ourselves to be leveraged as well. And I see Andrea with a heart sign. Yeah. So that's really speaking. That's really speaking to those who are on this call. And let me remind everyone, please feel free to share your thoughts and put your comments in the chat section. We're also going to have a Q&A shortly, so you can also feel free to unmute and possibly show your face as well and contribute, because we want this to be as engaging as possible. And you made a point that really stuck with me. You made several points, but something that that is recurring when we have this conversation about collaboration is for all the parties to always understand that collaboration is not about money. It's not always about money. A lot of the time when we talk about collaboration, the first thought is, oh, we want to collaborate around funding. It isn't. You talked about Alberto speaking to information, and that's something that we share. We have a lot of, as you mentioned, in Africa. If we can just even begin to collaborate at that level and share information, and there's so much that we can do and we can achieve, because we are reinventing the wheel in so many situations where, so for instance, the African Philanthropy Forum, if we need data on a specific issue or in a specific area, it's possible that CAPSI, that is based in Johannesburg, has conducted that exercise because they're an academic institution, and they may be able to share that information with us as opposed over again. So there is so much that can be done in this space, and that's one of the, I think that's one big takeaway, and would continue to remind members of our community that there are various levels to collaboration, and some of it in the end may unlock funding, but not necessarily. But the greater goal is to maximize impact, as you shared. So I'm going to move on to the second to the last question so that we can have time for interaction. Something else that came up recurrently in the conversations that we had during the course of the year is the absence of gender protective laws and technology regulation in some countries, which affects the achievement of digital inclusion. So given your work in this space, especially where you are right now with Meta, how readily available is funding to finance policy advocacy versus project-based intervention? So for instance, yesterday, I was having a conversation with someone who was asking me about funding for a specific issue, again in the gender space, but she made reference to the fact that every time she looked, there were specific things that are sexy in this space that is always that, they always get the funding, while some other advocate. How would you to that and your experience?
Well, it goes back to my first, to part of my response to the first question that you asked me, that your funding is cyclical. It is again dependent on what the external funders believe is key, or what is trending in the wider global spaces. And I think that that's human nature. That's part of the course. The fact that we have indigenous foundations, the fact that we have an indigenous philanthropic community in itself gives us a little bit of buffer against that. So we can look internally and say, okay, what is needed? What is the landscape like? What is being funded and where are the gaps? When it comes to gender justice and the digital space, there is a lot of funding going for things like online sexual harassment. There's a lot of funding going for advocacy against the platforms, to make sure that they shore up their safety protections for users. There's a bit of funding going for education for users, but you don't really see much funding for policy and be it analysis or strategic policy advocacy. So take, for example, we all know how long it took to get the Violence Against Women Act passed. But the fact is that it has been passed. Now, would a funder be willing to provide support for a 3-year strategic research and advocacy project that looks at matching the provisions of the VAW to the criminal statutes in the country, or the new regulations, the new legislations that are coming out, like the Cybersecurity Act, that has a portion around stalking, or looking at perhaps well, the gender bill that eventually, maybe one day, it will be passed. But we have to admit that no matter how much change you do in civil society and the private sector, if you do not strengthen the policies, the policy-making environment, the policies and the laws and the institutions which will uphold these laws, we are constantly fighting a losing battle. So, and it is applicable to any single sector that you are looking at. Any single sector. You can work on education, you can work on health. But if the policy underpinning your maternal morbidity does not take into account and does not hold accountable the institutions that are supposed to ensure the reduction in maternal mortality, all you're doing is billboards outside. You will have an informed citizenship, but the levers by which they can hold the institutions that are accountable to them accountable will not work. Is there any funder that is willing to put their money behind strategic litigation? These are, so it is essential that when we look at, as we look at the maturity of the philanthropic space, we have to be willing to make bold bets. You can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. There's only so many schools that you will rehabilitate. If the curriculum doesn't make sense for the 22nd century, you're wasting your time. I hope I made sense.
You always do, Adora. And I was just thinking when you asked, is there a funder that would be willing to fund or support litigation? I thought, good thing our board chair is a lawyer, so we can start that conversation from there. And that is perfect for the next and last question, which I believe you've already started answering, but I would ask it again just in case there are other points that you have in that regard, and that is what role APS should actively play in this space, to ensure that we have more, we have we're crowding support from the philanthropic community.
I think APF, you need to play to your strengths. You are the preeminent convening organization on the continent. And I am saying this because I am also putting you on the spot, because the more you speak, the more will be expected. To whom much is given, much is expected. You have the opportunity to bring people into the space and have conversations beyond, oh, okay, I'm doing a health project, I'm focused on education, I'm focused on. When you look at, just take the issue of gender justice and the digital space. At the moment, everybody's talking about, the conversation has moved. We haven't even finished the conversation around safety online. We haven't finished the conversation around access. We haven't finished the conversation around opportunity. We haven't finished the conversation around protections. We are already in the space of artificial intelligence and generative AI. If we don't have protections, basic protections for women who are being insulted and abused, and their profiles are being replicated, and they are being doxxed and outed, imagine when AI becomes mainstream and generative AI becomes mainstream. And it is as simple as you are not capable, we do not have a robust enough regulatory and legal structure where somebody can go to court and have a stalker or somebody who has harassed them online prosecuted properly. And these are real-time live instances. Talk less of when somebody now creates a complete persona, a different, and posts it about you. We need to have, your APF has the opportunity to convene and have these conversations about where these different sectors are going to. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be the digital space. It could be education. We all know what the advances are. Every single member of APF has access, awareness, engagement at the most sophisticated and cutting edge developments across the world. So you now become you become the space where you bring that knowledge to the communities that you serve that are a little bit further behind and say, how do we bridge this gap? Some of us are doing it at the most basic level. Yes, it's bricks and mortar. And then where are the rest of us that are doing the intellectual thinking? Where are the rest of us that are putting the money down to equip organizations to start engaging for the future? Be there endowments to create repositories of information so that people have access to it. Be they research projects, be they supporting collaborations that can start, cutting edge stuff like strategic litigation. Let's see how far this thing will go. APF can, all you have, it's just 2 convenings a year. And we're not going to talk about the norm here. Everybody bring your intellect, bring your expertise, bring your history, bring your knowledge. And let's plan a new, let's blue sky where we want this continent to be, the realities of where we are now, and what is the one thing that we're going to say, yes, we will give back to start that conversation or to push it further down the line.
Thank you very much, Adora. There is a lot already going on within the APF community, but these thoughts that you're sharing with us or ideas that you're sharing with us are also very useful. And I'll use this as a call to invite everyone to our annual conference next year in Marrakesh holding from October 27th to 29th. Please register once we put the link up. We're looking forward to hosting you all. It's the largest philanthropic gathering in Africa, which we used to hold every other year, but from next year, it's going to be every year. But leading up to that, we always have a series of events all through the year in key cities across Africa. Someone at APF has decided to pin us when we're rounding up. Thank you. At this point, I'm going to open it up for questions. We have I would say we have about 8 minutes for that. I'll say 7 minutes. We have 8 minutes to round up. So, and I know that Andrea has burning questions. So, Andrea, you have the floor. Oh, Mr. Eva, you're welcome. I can see the board chair join.
Good morning, everyone.
Thankfully at the
end. Great. Yeah, Andrea, please go on.
Hi, sorry. Good morning, everyone. Super thrilled to be joining you from the Bahamas. I would just like to thank the presenter for an awesome presentation and to let you know that a lot of the issues that you brought up, we are facing the same thing in this country and I think globally. So it's not just an Africa issue. It's a conversation that we need to have across the board worldwide. And I normally like to attend these sessions because it gives me insights into what is happening in other countries in the world. And then I could take it back to my platform and try to implement change in my country. So I thank you for all of the information that you shared. I am so looking forward to getting the recording of the session so I could watch it again and make more detailed notes. And I tried to connect with you on LinkedIn, but it's saying that you need to have your email address to be able to connect with you. So I put my LinkedIn in the chat, and okay. I would love to continue the conversation.
I will send you an invite.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. So that I could let you know the projects that I'm working on and see how we can collaborate, because you did stress a lot the importance of collaborating. And like I said, it's not just an Africa issue, it's a global issue that we need to have conversations about. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Omolayo has her hand up, I think.
Omolayo, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you both so much for this session. It was definitely insightful. I agree with the previous speaker. I loved everything that you were saying around collaboration and then also around whether or not the market is ready for certain conversations. Oh, I didn't introduce myself. I am with the African Diaspora Network. And so I was encouraged to attend this event by the founder. So just really happy to I'm glad she, pushed me to attend. I'm recent to the team, but we love your work at the African Philanthropy Forum and, really excited to be here. So back to my question around, what is the market ready for? I find that a lot of times around these conversations, especially with gender justice, there is two kind of things going on. One, where people say they want to sponsor and support gender equality, but they only want to look to seem like they are supporting it, right? So if you have an idea for them that supports gender justice on a surface level, like, oh yes, we included women, they're all for it. But then when you have an idea for them that really moves the needle, really shifts power dynamics, they're like, ooh, this is a little radical for us. So just curious from your perspective, what kind of work people who are looking at tapping into funding arrangements need to do around educating funders through these topics? Because I think sometimes that's the key that's missing, where it's they know about the topic, but they haven't been primed to understand the topic in its full context. And so a lot of times organizations looking for grants and looking for funding, they have very low capacity. That's one way I'll put it. So it's either they could spend that time educating the funder, or they could spend the time, working on collaborations and less funding opportunities, but people who are already in that mind space, already primed for those topics. So just curious your thoughts and reflections on, the approach that should be taken when there's limited capacity for all the work that needs to be done within the space. Thank you.
Well, I'm actually going to say something that I tell a lot of grantees. You need to do your work. You need to invest probably as much time as you do in preparing your grant proposal, in searching for the right partners. So I mean, as you're talking, and you're off the top of my head, I'm thinking you can talk to the Global Fund for Women. You can talk to Mama Cash. You can go to AWID. These are funders that have historically been willing to put their money and their faith behind what people would consider radical actions. And I think that at least over the last 2-3 years, we've seen again a shift. Thanks to Mackenzie, the Amazon lady, giving unrestricted money, there's been a shift towards being a lot more flexible, and the conversation around listening to what grantees are saying, the people who are on the ground who are doing the work. Now it will take a bit of time to search for funders that are willing to be a lot more flexible. It's been a historic issue. Just getting unrestricted funding for decades was a problem. And or even getting institutional support factored into your grant making funds. You would give people money to execute projects, but they can't pay their rent. They can't pay their staff. But the conversation has moved very much. It's a lot better now. But I will say this, what I say to people who reach out to me and say, well, where can we find? Do the research. Do the research. There are funders that are still very flexible. There are a lot more that are coming on that are willing to be educated. A lot of the traditional funders are also holding that space and bringing in their fellow traditional funders to listen more. Ford is doing it. Rockefeller is doing it. Hewlett Packard have always done it. Skoll. So,
a lot of them.
Yeah.
Thank you, Adora. I saw we're almost at time, but I know Maureen's hand was up. I don't know if you still have a question or if it's been answered.
Thank you so much for this space. Maureen Andinda here from Kampala, Uganda. I work for Frida, the Young Feminist Fund, as Resource Mobilization Co-Manager. I did want to add something in the context of flexible funding and core support to grantee partners, but it's the point that Adora made, so that's why I put my hand down. I didn't want to repeat myself. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was really engaging.
Thank you, Maureen. And Adora, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for staying up late. I know you still have later meetings where you are, but thank you for making the time to join us today for the very last edition of our series on gender justice and digital technology this year. And thanks to all those who joined us from various parts of the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you. We look forward to having you join us in 2024.